Mormon Stories is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies solely upon the support of people like you, its listeners. To help keep the podcast alive or to become a member of the community, please become a monthly subscriber by visiting mormonstories.org and clicking on the donate button on the right side of the page under support. All contributions to Mormon Stories are completely tax deductible and go towards producing the podcast and building communities and programs of support for Mormons like you. Thanks for your support.
Kindly light amid the encircling gloom. Lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Laura Andreasen, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
Granddaughter of M. Russell Ballard and Barbara Ballard, right?
That is correct.
All right. So in the first part of this interview, we focused on your own experiences growing up in the church, on the things you've loved about the church, about your relationship with your grandparents and your parents, and all the way through sort of, your mission years, your marriage, struggling with marriage, and eventually struggling with the church. And we concluded with something that I think is really interesting, which is sort of this idea that if the church is true, even if you resign, there'll still be a place for you because God's loving. And the main reason you've resigned from the church is that it doesn't bring you joy. And the gospel's supposed to be about joy, and it doesn't bring you joy as hard as you've tried, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So that's, I think that's really interesting. And so even now you remain ambivalent about the truthfulness of the church. You're still very open and maybe even lean towards believing in many or most of the truth claims, but you definitely don't agree with the church's stance on LGBT issues, same-sex marriage, and its recent policies about children. Is that all fair, or did I get it right or wrong?
No, that's right. And, I do worry that people are going to be bothered by that, but that is my honest opinion. Like I said, check on me in a few months. I may have done more research or learned something new, and I might feel a different way. So. Okay,
got it. All right. So now what I've done is I put together a big old list of questions that the listeners have put forward, and I'm just going to ask them to you one by one. Is that okay?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so a big line of questioning just is around your dad specifically, and a lot of people want to know his strengths and weaknesses, and you've already talked a bit about the fact that he's been loving and supportive, as has your grandmother, but that maybe he was apostle first and grandfather second. Mm-hmm. Any other strengths and weaknesses that you would want to highlight, or do you think we've pretty much covered it? Also, maybe a weakness of sometimes brushing you off when you have difficult things you want to talk about, or not wanting to talk about difficult things. And his views on women haven't been great. So I'm just trying to recap.
Yeah, no kidding. I think a weakness of his is that he, in my point of view, struggles with being empathetic. And I think that must be a really difficult struggle to have as an apostle when you are supposed to be leading so many people. I feel like there should be more empathy there. And maybe there is, but he's terrible at showing it. I'm not sure. So I think that is a weakness that I know he has. But hopefully he's working on it. Hopefully. But I don't know. And as for strengths, he is, as much as he struggles with empathy, I do think he is a good person. I think he is honest. I think he has integrity, and he is kind. He is stern, and that can sometimes be looked upon as being unkind. But I think he's got a good heart.
Okay. And I'm very glad to hear that, and that makes sense to me. And a lot of people like this. We'll talk about the lipstick comment later, but a lot of people. You said he struggles with empathy. I think that's one perception, and then people are just wondering whether he's just kind of insensitive or clueless. And some like to attribute many of the apostles to just having been raised in World War II, sort of post-World War II, Cold War kind of era. I mean, he's just old. And that older people were raised with more, let's just say, chauvinistic or masculine or sensitivities that make it so they just are insensitive. And one of the listeners asked, does he know that he's insensitive? Does he know that he and the other brethren, too many, come across as chauvinistic or bigoted? Do you think do you think he's aware of that?
He should be. I've told him as much, but I don't think that they are aware of that. I think they are very, and he has said this before, probably in a conference talk. I don't even know half the time if it's in a conference talk or if it's something he's just said, but about how people say that the brethren are out of touch, but in reality they are very much in touch, and they do travel, and they do see the world. And I will give him that. He does travel and he does see the world, but when he travels and sees the world, he sees it in a bubble. And that bubble is a bubble of the brethren that are there to meet him and to take him to his meetings and all of this stuff. He's not meeting your average Joe and Jane member of the church over there. He's meeting the higher up people in the church. And so in that aspect, yeah, I think he is a little bit out of touch. I think he's a little bit out of touch. He probably just a little bit insensitive, and yeah, he is old. It's all of it. It's everything. I think it's not fair to just say it's one thing. I think it's a little bit of everything.
And there's a bit of a sort of, I know when I worked in corporate America, I worked at Microsoft with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, and to see these executives. When the time I was there, the Department of Justice was suing Microsoft, and there was just this level of, they surrounded themselves with people who agreed with them, and it just made it so that they never had anyone around them telling them they were full of crap, and if they did, maybe they would fire them or get rid of them. And so there was just this sort of king who doesn't have clothes, and either they're built up to where they just dismiss any critical feedback like you've given him, or they just don't ever hear it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to impose that on him, but do you think that's semi-accurate in terms of what it's like to be an apostle?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't think many people dare question anything, especially to their face, because of all the shame that goes with not being faithful if you question. So I think there's that, and I do think that people, they won't say it or they do, and maybe he does write people off as unfaithful. I know I'm probably pretty easy to write off as unfaithful because I do question things, and I question them louder than maybe they would like me to question them. So,
and how would that make you feel if you were a fly on the wall and other Ballards were talking about you? And they're, oh, that Laura, she's crazy, or she got kicked out of high school, and she's had mental illness, or she's been suicidal. Like, you can't. I imagine that's probably what he would say and what others would say, because even if you're a person of privilege with money and with status and with health and well-being, if you ever go against the church, you're going to be slandered. You are going to be discredited, criticized, maligned. That's just what they do. I imagine that in some ways you will be an easy target because you've struggled. You've even admitted, infidelity. And so how do you imagine that's what they're going to do, what he's going to do? And if so, how does that make you feel? But more importantly, what would your response be to people who malign or discredit you because of the struggles you've had?
Well, I'm it's not new to me. It's been said before, and I've not long ago, my mother-in-law, I overheard it, said, "What's going on with Laura? I heard that she's just a gay-loving adulteress, something or other. She's just saying it all on her blog." And I overheard it, and I overheard her say she wanted to take my kids away, and it was painful. And it's something that I hear often from my parents, from my aunts and uncles, from my cousins. I think they love me, but I think they disregard me very easily, and it's hard. And it's not just hard for me, it's hard for everybody who leaves the church, because you want to feel like your feelings are important and you matter. And when it happens, I'm not even going to say if, because I know it will. You know, my go-to is always to just let it go and to leave it alone. And I probably will let them say what they have to say, but I will just encourage them to be kind and compassionate and try to look at other people's points of view. And that's kind of what I feel like I've been trying to ease them into it. Like, I've gotten tattoos and I've done other things. So I'm like trying to ease them into, you know, the fact that, hey, I'm not maybe what you want me to be. And then this was maybe the final straw. I don't know. Or maybe talking to you is the final straw. Most likely speaking out about it would be more upsetting to them than feeling it myself.
You know, have you ever heard of Brene Brown? Does that name mean anything to you?
I love Brene Brown.
Okay.
Let me tell you how much I love Brene Brown. Yes.
Okay. So that's interesting, because one of the best questions I received is, has Elder Ballard, has Grandpa Ballard ever expressed vulnerability? Have you ever seen him show weakness or admit frailty or mistakes or vulnerability? That's sort of part one of the question. And then part two is, you know, you just said it. You said that the straw that breaks the camel's back might be you simply telling your story and being open and vulnerable. I've been very moved and touched by your honesty and vulnerability here. You're willing to accept responsibility. You're willing to admit your own mistakes. You're not pointing the finger. You're willing to be kind and critical, but balanced. And I just see that as good, healthy openness and candor and vulnerability, the kind of stuff that leads to positive mental health. But I just wonder to what extent there's a culture of vulnerability and openness and candor in your family.
First of all, thank you. That was like super nice. Some of the nicest things anybody's ever said about me, which may answer your next question about how vulnerable people are. Okay. No, I do not recall ever seeing my grandfather vulnerable. My sister died when she was a baby, and I've had two other cousins die. And I don't even remember seeing a vulnerability there, I always attributed it to the fact that he knew, you know, where they were and all about the afterlife and everything like that. And my parents, my father in particular has never said he was wrong. And so that is kind of the male role models I've had. They've refused to admit that they're wrong and that they're sorry. So no, I have not ever seen him be vulnerable. I don't have good role models on what that's like.
So there's a degree to which in your family, the men have to be strong and confident and reaffirm the gospel. And that means they can't show signs of weakness or maybe even be too sensitive about weakness or tragedy, that it's always got to be stiff upper lip, church is true, gospel's great, plan of happiness. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah, well, we are of British stock, so we've got that stiff upper lip, I guess, except for me. I sort of failed with that one, but
or succeeded.
Yeah, I guess. But yeah, and I think for my grandpa, it's probably twice as hard for him, and he probably feels more pressure than other people to to not show that vulnerability. But I don't get it, because everybody likes Elder Holland because he shows his vulnerability. So I'm like, Grandpa, can't you be a little bit more like Elder Holland and like pound the pulpit and cry every now and then? But, he's just not like that.
I'll just say that, just in your dad's defense, your grandpa's defense, I think lately, I've had interactions with Elder Holland, and he seemed very sincere and loving. But then he'll give other talks where he seems very angry and critical. And then Elder Eyring is really known for his crying. But there's another side to that, where sometimes those things can feel like emotional manipulation. Mm-hmm. And so I just think there's trade-offs there, because I never could make sense of Elder Holland's shows of empathy with me, with how insensitive he would be when he would talk in public. And so, I don't know. That's just
true. No, that's true. I think a lot of people do feel manipulated, and I get that. I do, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay, so the answer is Grandpa Ballard has never really shown a lot of vulnerability that you've seen, and that's just not really valued in your family.
That's right.
Would you say, what's the of all your grandparents, the Ballards, children and grandchildren, how many are, within that family tree, is inactivity or disbelief rare or not rare? And then as a second part, what about do you ever have exposure to the families of other apostles? And is that rare or not rare? Just sort of inactivity or apostatizing or whatever. So start with your family and then go outside.
In my family, and it's a large family, very large family, I believe I am the only one who has been inactive or expressed any desire to leave the church.
Of all the grandchildren? Of all the grandchildren,
So
we're talking probably 30 grandchildren?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you're the only one. So what is that? Like, how do you explain that?
Well, I've always been a bad seed. I don't know.
No.
I don't know.
I mean, obviously 2/3 of all people baptized in the church have left it. So, mm-hmm. There are only 5 million active Mormons. But even so, in the United States, the Pew Foundation said that 1/3 of all those who are raised LDS end up leaving. So, for grandkids raised Mormon and children and grandchildren raised Mormon, there's a 1 in 3 chance they're going to go inactive traditionally. And I'm certainly aware of children and grandchildren of apostles and other families who have gone inactive or left the church. Steve Benson comes to mind, or I know President Kimball had an inactive child or two, and I know a few of Neil A. Maxwell's grandkids who have left the church, or Joseph B. Wirthlin. So, I mean, I know that it happens that the children and grandchildren of apostles can go inactive, but in your case, that's a really high success rate for your grandparents. What do you attribute that to? I'm not saying what's wrong with you. I'm saying how can so many of them?
I really don't know. I will question how happy they are, but I can't. I'm sure they would tell you that they're all very happy. But I question it.
Why? I mean, I don't want you to tell any names or any specifics, but why would you question that?
Well, I told you we've got some crazy going on in my family. I used to joke that insanity runs in our family because it really kind of.
You don't mean just your parents and siblings. You mean aunts and uncles and cousins.
Yes, definitely. It's on both sides, but it's particularly bad on the Ballard side of my family. There's a lot of anxiety and depression, and so I wonder about their happiness only because I wondered about mine, and I know how the church affected me and my happiness and my anxiety, and so I wonder about them. But I also see that they could be afraid to do anything else. Most of them also were born and raised in Utah, so that might play a part in it. The culture is much more strong there. I don't know, but I do know they are faithful people, and I believe that they all have a testimony of the church.
let's just say someone is the grandchild or child of an apostle, what would be the dynamics, the feelings, the pressures that would keep them from being able to be open and honest and maybe even doubt? What would that be like?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that one of the biggest reasons I've never wanted to say anything that could possibly hurt the church is because there is a sort of mantle of responsibility that's inherited. It's not something I ever wanted or would have agreed to do, but we, I do see the good in the church, and I would hate for myself or my actions to convince someone to leave if the church made them happy. I would never want somebody to leave what was making them happy for something that would make them unhappy. And so I think that is a big reason why a lot of us don't ever speak out, maybe, if we disagree, because we don't want to be the person that leads people away. I would love to lead people to their true happiness, whatever that means, but I would never want to make anybody unhappy.
Sure. And so people within your family, because your grandpa's an apostle, would feel this sense of duty to keep the family name going, to be supportive of the family's values, and to never cause anyone to leave.
Right, sure. There's a big push on our heritage. My grandpa talks about our heritage all the time. In fact, didn't he write a book called Our Heritage? Oh, no, that's the other church book. I was like, there's something called Our Heritage. But yeah, he is big on our family tree. And I think he probably feels a lot of pressure not to let our ancestors down as well.
Yeah. I imagine that pressure can be really overwhelming. Yeah.
Right.
And I imagine, like you say, people are sincere in their beliefs too. Okay. So, this is a question that I think is valuable. Do you know if your grandfather has ever known a gay or lesbian person firsthand, like a close family member or close friend? Is he able to sort of keep it at arm's length, and that's how he's able to have such sort of harsh policies or support harsh policies? Do you think this is ever, you talked about him being maybe a little bit insensitive or lacking empathy in some ways. Do you think a part of that has just been a lack of exposure in terms of LGBT concerns or even faith crisis issues? Do you think it's just maybe never really touched him in a personal way, and that's what allows him to be not empathetic or insensitive about things like faith crisis, feminism, or LGBT issues?
Yes, as far as I know, and he knows a lot more people than I do, but I do not know of any gay or lesbian people or transgender people that he knows personally. He could. There's nobody in my family who is gay, lesbian, or transgender.
That you know of. Yeah.
I always say yet because, we have kids who are having kids. There's got to be one somewhere. I'm kind of like, is it bad that I'm rooting for some of them to come out and just be proud and be who you are? Because I think it's good. I think it would be wonderful for the brethren to sort of have those experiences, because how else can you learn something like that unless it's really touched your heart? It's easy to push somebody aside as a group of people that you have nothing in common with, but when it's one of your own, it's a different story. So as far as I know, he doesn't have any of those experiences, and that may contribute. Yes.
Okay. So in all your cousins, aunts, uncles, you're not aware of anyone ever coming out as gay or lesbian. I imagine that the same pressures that would keep a grandchild from ever doubting or leaving the church would keep a gay or lesbian cousin from ever wanting to admit to grandma and grandpa that they're gay or lesbian, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I would imagine that would be very difficult. In fact, every time I say something on Facebook, I'm always pretty sure people are going to think that I'm coming out as gay. And I'm always like, I wish. Come on, people. It would be, I would be a fabulous lesbian. But, I'm not. So I always think it's kind of funny. People get all nervous about that. But I'm waiting for it to happen. It's bound to happen with the amount of kids that are in our family. So it'll happen.
And that's, I'm just trying to think about how the brethren do what they do. Like, they're human. And, the biggest question is, do they really believe? Or are they just like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain? And you've already said, I'll just ask you directly. You think that the brethren, do you think that the apostles and the first presidency sincerely believe the church is true? Or do you think they're just, fooling everybody?
I do believe they think it's true. And I think that it could also be one of those situations that, so say they get up there and they're called and they supposedly have this special witness. And so say they don't get that special witness. Well, then if Mormon culture has taught me anything, I would imagine they would be beating themselves up. Like, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm not faithful enough. I'm not this enough. And so I think it's really easy for us to continually tell ourselves, well, we haven't gotten a special witness, so I must be doing something wrong. So that's just total hypothetical. If you get called to be an apostle and you don't have that special witness, you'll be trying to figure out what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
So I could see how that could happen. I truly believe that they believe what they're saying is true.
Right. And it just makes sense to me if they're in this bubble where everybody's scared to tell them what they really think and feel. If vulnerability is downplayed and discouraged, and if they're always sheltered and protected from people's real problems and concerns, to the point where a gay or lesbian grandkid may not even feel comfortable coming out to them, or a doubter or a feminist or whatever, then they don't have the experiences that would lead to empathy or understanding. They don't have anyone around them disagreeing with them. And the whole culture is, they carry more than anyone the pressure to believe and to keep the family name strong and to carry on the tradition. And those pressures in and of themselves can explain why they believe when there's so much that's, difficult.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a catch-22. So say they get up there and have doubts, they're probably going to blame themselves instead of questioning the truth, because that's been so ingrained into all of us. So that just seems logical to me for a believer who gets up there instead of doubting to question what they're doing wrong instead.
Yeah. So this sort of, you touched on this question that was certainly the most asked question, is that, have they had a special witness with Christ, and there's even people who say that they've heard either directly from your grandpa or from others telling stories about your grandpa, that they would look at them and say, I know in ways that you don't, that Jesus lives. And so how is that talked about in your family? Is it ever directly addressed? Is it forbidden to even talk about it? Talk about that personal witness of Christ, expectation or assumption that we have, or myth that we have about apostles.
Okay, first of all, it's obnoxious that anybody would ever say, I know in ways that you don't. I mean, it might be true, but it's still annoying and it bothers me. But I can see him saying it, so I'm not calling anybody a liar. It is a very, very, very taboo subject. And I remember my grandpa came to one of my wards once, and he decided to do a question and answer type thing. And I was thinking to myself, please don't let anybody ask if he's seen Jesus. First question asked, have you seen Jesus? And I was like, oh, I was so embarrassed, the gall of that person to ask that, right? But then I get it. Of course people want to know that. But it's very taboo. I've never straight up asked him. He's never offered that. But we are all led to the assumption that, yes, he has had that experience. he has not told us anything about it. And he said it's something that's too sacred to share, and he wouldn't share it. And so I am not privileged enough to know that information. But wouldn't it be cool if he just didn't tell us because Jesus was black? I'm just kidding. Totally not. That's not what would happen. But it's a very taboo subject, and I unfortunately cannot enlighten you all as to whether or not he has seen Jesus, because he certainly.
What you can say is it's never been stated, and
right.
he's never talked about it, and everybody's scared
to it.
He's alluded to it.
Yes.
And you already went there, because a few minutes ago you're talking about how you're theorizing that they get there, they're supposed to have that special witness, that maybe they don't, and that then they internalize that or justify it in some way. And so is that, can I take from that you aren't necessarily convinced that that's what happens?
I really don't know, but I could see it happening that way. But I have no idea if they have seen Jesus Christ or not. Like, I have got no idea. But I could see how they would question themselves before they question the truth of the church.
Yeah, that's powerful. Okay, so there's probably a lot of perceptions about from members about what it's like to be an apostle and what they're like and what they're not like. What someone asked, what are the correct and incorrect perceptions about what it's like to be an apostle? Would you have any insight on that at all, or is that too vague or hard of a question for you to answer?
Well, I think it's got to be hard for members of the Quorum of the 12 to try and get people to understand when they're speaking as an apostle and when they're speaking as just an individual. I think they probably struggle with that. I only have insight on what it's like to be an apostle's granddaughter, and so I only know what I know there. But I do imagine it is tough, and they struggle with being in the public eye constantly, making a stupid comment and then having it rehashed over and over and over. And I think that's got to be hard. It's got to be difficult for them.
How about all that travel? Like, a lot of people who would defend them say, that it's not a fun life to always be on the road, to always be traveling, to always be missing your kids and grandkids, to be sacrificing what many would say is retirement in those golden years, and they're off as road warriors. Is that true, or is it not true?
That is definitely true. They are constantly working, and I would never want that job. It seems horrible. I would never, ever, ever wish that upon anybody, because that is their life, and they don't get out of it until they die. And that just sounds terrible, and it takes a toll on them. I think that it's going to be really hard. I don't think it's presumptive of me to say I don't think they enjoy it, but I don't know how they possibly could, unless they're extremely egotistical, which maybe they are. But I don't see how anybody could enjoy that life.
But he would never admit that, right? Because that's part of the deal.
I think he would admit that it's very difficult and it's time consuming. But I don't think he would be as crass to say, I hate this job. I might, but I'm not an apostle, so.
Do you have any insight into how the brethren, the apostles, see each other, whether they bicker and fight, whether they dislike each other, whether they're really close and get along well and love each other? Do you get any insight into that dynamic between apostles and prophets?
Well, my grandpa has said anytime you get 15 people together from varying backgrounds, and varying backgrounds is interesting. I'm like, how varying are your backgrounds? But whatever. that you're going to have differences of opinion. And he says there are differences of opinion and people disagree. I've never actually seen or heard of any times where they dislike each other or bicker with each other. But I would imagine they disagree with each other. They've got to. But I think they also don't really talk about it because they've got a front that they need to keep up.
So your grandpa would have never said that old Boy K. Packer's a jerk, or that Jeffrey Holland really thinks he's something. He would never. He would never make comments like that.
It's a good thing he doesn't, because I'd remember him and bring him up later talking to you. But no, he doesn't. Although I'm sure he probably thinks it occasionally.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, just this theme of like, you don't talk about stuff and you don't show vulnerability, that's coming up again and again. Mm-hmm. And it just sounds like that's just a very strong part of your family culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's hard. I don't like it, but that is definitely the way it is.
Yeah. Okay. A huge question that people asked is around the salary, compensation, and finances of being an apostle. And I don't know if you know this, but there's this former CES instructor named Grant Palmer, who is reported to have had a private meeting with a former high up member in the Quorum of the 70, who made the claim that when someone is called as an apostle, they receive a large amount of money, like some say as much as $1 million, that they can use to pay off all their debts, and that's a loan, but it's forgivable as long as they observe whatever rules are tied to that loan. And so they're able to sort of pay off all their debts, buy a vacation home, and then be financially stable and secure. And then the rumor is that there's some sort of salary between $300,000 and $400,000 with really, really good benefits and obviously a pension for life. Now, I'm going to guess you're going to give me the same answer, which is you have no idea what his compensation is. But how would that seem preposterous to you, or would that seem in the realm of possibility?
That would seem within the realm of possibility. I do know that they receive enough, but see, they won't, as your theme is correct, they won't come out and say, hey, this is what I get or whatever. I mean, I will ask. I'll straight up go and ask, hey, is this true? And I'll see what he says if he ever talks to me, or I'll ask my mom. But I know they receive enough to live on, but what that means to me is very little, because that could be a large amount or a very small amount. All I know is I don't see any of it, and that sucks, because if they're getting $1 million, spread the wealth, man. But so it's within the realm of possibility, and I will ask and see what is said or not.
Okay. In terms of like, I've heard of certain apostles having multiple homes and vacation homes in Heber and Midway, and a high-rise condominium. And do you get a sense, or vacation, places to vacation? Do you have a sense that he has lots of assets that would mean that he's done really well?
Well, I know for a fact that he does not have lots of assets, and I don't remember the last time he and my grandma took a vacation. When they go do something, it's usually with family, with my aunts and uncles, or with whomever. He only owns, and I believe that I would know this, he is just in a condo right now. It's a smallish condo. It's right beneath the floor of where President Monson lives, so they get to hear all the wild parties going on up there and pound on the roof with a broom. So he lives right below there.
Is this in City Creek or somewhere else?
It's right across from it's right by the church office building and across from the temple. So I can't remember the name of State. Is it State Street? I think it's right off of, or North Temple. I can't remember. It hasn't even been that long since I've been to Utah. but it's right by the church administration building.
Okay. And that's the building where maybe many of the apostles live?
As far as I know, only himself and President Monson live there.
Okay.
My grandpa lives, recently moved there from another condo because my grandma's struggling, and it's just closer so he can get to and from work through the secret tunnels.
Okay. So not a bunch of extra homes and vacation homes. And
No, I'm sure that others do, but in all honesty, a lot of the other apostles were more well off to begin with, so that could very well be their money.
Okay. Right. Okay. What about special perks for apostles and their family members? You know, you hear about jets being offered for them to take sort of extravagant vacations. You hear about a fleet of rental cars being available for family members to use. You wonder about what happens during General Conference if you get behind the scenes special VIP treatment with food and amenities, trips, you know, and again, this may all just be rumor. So
Yeah.
are there perks to being, what are the perks to being an apostle or the children of apostles or grandchildren of apostles, or are there none?
Well, y'all are going to be real disappointed because really the only perk is we get to have a conference ticket for the session that he speaks in.
Oh my gosh.
That is our perk. I mean, and really, I'm not even sure we deserve that. And I always give mine away because I don't want to go to conference. But other people, you know, most of my other cousins love to go. I don't, but that's just me. And for like the musical thing they do every Christmas, there's usually tickets available for family for that. I've never been in a rental car or a super cool airplane. I did get to ride through the secret tunnels on a golf cart once. So that was pretty fun.
I've even done that.
That's about the extent of my, I know it's really not that exciting. There's no food, no VIP treatment after conference. We still get stuck in the same horrible traffic. So yeah, that's, at least for my family. Maybe a different family is different, but I've never seen any other benefit other than one conference ticket. And
you feel like your aunts and uncles have all sort of experienced the same sorts of things?
Yeah, well, because I think they would talk about it and I would find out and ask about it.
And your parents are still active in believing in the church?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's good to know. You know, that's good to know. To what extent, there's also a perception that general authorities tend to call family members or close friends as general authorities. And so, just like we talked about your dad being called as a stake president because he's the son-in-law potentially of, you know, do you think that proximity to the brethren, you know, and you know that this past conference, there are 3 openings. They're all 3 white guys from Utah. Mm-hmm. Do you think that, you know, whatever inspiration may or may not happen, that a significant factor in who gets called as general authorities is kind of who you're related to or who you know?
Yes. And that makes me a bad Mormon for saying that, because you're not supposed to believe that, or at least admit to believing that.
Have you seen that? Like, have you seen people called?
You know, it's more of a suspicion than anything else. I know 2 of my uncles have been mission presidents, and 3 of my uncles have been mission presidents, and I just gotta wonder, you know, I have to, if that had anything to do with my grandfather. Maybe not, but it's suspicious.
Sure. And doesn't even have to be that he makes it that they're, you know, it could be just people under him know about that, or they're familiar with them, or they come to know them. And so familiarity, it could be just a matter of familiarity.
Absolutely.
Or it could be mid-level managers wanting to, you know, please somebody. And it could be your grandpa's influence. Like it could be any of those things, right?
Right. And I think that I would imagine there is a connection.
Yeah.
Personally, I would think so.
Yeah. What about this is alluded to with kind of your dad getting a really nice job with the church headquarters. And of course, he went to Harvard Business School, so it's not like he didn't have his own credentials. But one of the fears that I have, knowing just how humans work, is that business and money in church often get sort of interwoven. And so, I worry about like people being awarded contracts because they're family or friends of apostles, business opportunities, people getting chosen to work for church or for companies that the church owns or for companies that the church has influence with. In other words, people don't make money directly from the church, but because of their associations with top church leaders, then they have an increased opportunity and sometimes direct opportunity because of those family associations.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's valid, and I think that probably happens. I can't say that I know of a specific example, but I would say, yeah, that probably does happen.
So like all the money made off of City Creek, there's probably potentially a lot of family and friends of general authorities that were awarded contracts, possibly.
Yeah, I would say that's a good possibility.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, anything else that you've seen in terms of how the church works that's interesting to you, good or bad, just in terms of church administration and how the church is operated? It's just sort of like a final question before we move on to other topics.
I have personally felt like the church can be a little bit wasteful sometimes, and that bothers me. My husband works in construction, and he doesn't work with a particular company anymore, but when he did, the person who owns it is LDS, and so I got to hear different ways of how the church handled building their temples. And they had some sort of decorator who decorated the apartments that are within the temple or next to the temple. And I guess she came in and said, I don't like any of this stuff. And it was all brand new, all very nice. And the church, according to this could not be true, threw it away. And I thought, wow, what a waste. And I actually did shoot my grandpa an email about that. I was like, if this is happening, that is so not cool, and you might want to look into it. I'm sure he just thinks I'm meddling, but it didn't sit with me well because people struggle to pay their tithing, and it bothers me to know if that is true, that the church would be so wasteful. And I know they have very high standards with their church buildings and their temples, but that is one thing that does bother me. Maybe I don't understand it. I don't understand how you could be wasteful and use tithing funds like that.
How did your husband end up getting a job with the construction firm that does work for the church?
I'm trying to figure out how to say this without getting anybody in trouble here. Let's just say we have a connection from somebody we both know. It's not a family member of mine, but it is an LDS person that we know here. So,
I mean, that's because that was my wonder is like one thing the church does is it builds a lot of buildings and it owns a lot of real estate and it has a lot of business holdings. And so I'm wondering to what extent are children and grandchildren, aunts, uncles, and cousins employed with companies that benefit from tithing from the church. And it sounds like your family is an example of that. I'm not saying that's wrong or inappropriate. I'm just saying it seems like your family's an example of that happening.
Yeah. Well, my husband, he doesn't work there anymore, but they do build other things like restaurants and things like that. And he never actually worked in the church division, but I think the church has a mindset of we take care of our own, and so the church hires LDS contractors, and good chances we're probably related somehow, right? Because we're all inbred. But so there's a good chance that happens often.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's evil. It's just the way humans work. If we were talking Judaism or Catholicism, I'm guessing it would be the same thing,
Right.
But it's certainly true with us.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, did you talk to your dad? So a lot of people wanted to talk about the lipstick comment.
Oh, right.
Did you catch wind of that? Did you talk to, Elder Ballard about that? And if so, did he have any comments about it?
Well, it's not the first time he's done that, actually. He spoke at Utah State University years ago. I believe this was before my mission. And I went up to hear him speak, and he told the women there to not walk around like their death warmed over. And I was like, whoa! And that was a whole weird experience for me because, I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to sit down before he was. So I was up on the stand with him and my grandma, and everybody is sort of standing. And I'm like, is anybody ever going to sit down? So I finally sat down, and my grandma's like, get up. You don't sit down until he sits down. And I remember being so embarrassed because it was in front of thousands of people. And obviously that showed my complete and utter disrespect for him and his calling. But so it's not the first time he's done it. And I remember being I kind of did that uncomfortable laugh, that I think a lot of other people did when he made the infamous lipstick comment. But it's just stupid. He shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have said it. And, he hasn't said anything about it, and I don't know. We'll have to see if he ever does.
Do you think someone told him that caused a stir, and do you think he knows that?
Oh, I'm sure somebody told. I mean, if nobody in the family told him, which they probably didn't because they didn't know it caused a stir, because it only caused a stir amongst you heathens. Don't you know that? So I'm sure somebody who monitors all of the anti-stuff saw and let him know.
Anti-what?
There are spies amongst you, I'm sure. But I'm sure somebody told him because I believe it was taken down and they didn't want to flame the fire or whatever. But yeah, he shouldn't have said it.
And so you're saying your family remains sort of disconnected from this broader conversation about, the church and things that people are struggling with. Are you saying that for the most part, your immediate and extended family just wouldn't have even been aware that was a problem?
No, they wouldn't have been. And they would have been the people laughing at it. Because you're not supposed to look at stuff that goes against the church. And even though Mormon Stories, I don't feel goes against the church. I think it's just people telling their honest stories. But something like that, it's such a slippery slope. It's such a dangerous thing to get involved in because, the devil will get you. He's really sneaky that way. So I think that's the way they look at it. We've been lectured many, many times to not look at any anti-Mormon propaganda. So I think they just don't let themselves go there.
Do you think that would include Richard Bushman, Rough Stone Rolling? Have you ever heard of that book? Do you know what that book is?
I've only heard of it recently. And I don't really know what it is, no.
So you're guessing that your aunts and uncles and cousins maybe haven't even heard of Terrell Givens or Richard Bushman?
No, probably not. It's possible, but I doubt it.
Okay. Certainly within your immediate family, those names haven't come up.
No.
Okay. All right. So some people wanted to know if you had any fun stories about your interactions with the apostles or First Presidency members. You've talked about Elder President Packer being a little bit grumpy about hearing President Monson not treating. And I've heard people say that about President Monson, that he can be grouchy with the help. Mm-hmm. do like families of apostles all get together and hang out? Have you ever developed close friendships with other apostles or not?
No, I've never gotten together with anybody, and I don't know any other grandchildren or children of apostles. I've never known anybody else.
Now, I wouldn't have thought that. I would think that they would all be hanging out together and getting to know each other. Why do you think that is that they're not?
I have no idea. I guess I would imagine because people have their own lives and everybody's families are so big, but I have no idea.
Okay.
You'd think we'd have some cool secret club, but we don't.
Right.
And if we do, I'm not invited, so
Right.
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay. We mentioned a little bit about leader worship. A lot of people had a question about that. Do you think your grandpa's aware of the level of leader worship that sort of goes on in the church? And if so, do you think he's comfortable or uncomfortable with it? And then what do you think about it?
I think it happens. I don't know to what extent he is aware of it. I'm not sure he would look at it as being leader worship. I kind of see it happening. I sort of see them getting treated like royalty a little bit, and I'm not sure they think of it that way. It does bother me a little bit, but I took lessons from the fundamentalist Mormons one time. You want to talk about leader worship? I saw it a lot more in that particular religion than I do in ours, but I'm not saying it's not there. Maybe I just don't buy into it the way a lot of other people do. Okay.
So it's never come up like him saying, I wish they'd stop taking everything I say so seriously, or, I can't even make a mistake. I guess he's just never expressed any vulnerability or anything that would cause anyone to doubt or criticize. And so you can never know, right?
Right. Well, he's never said that I've ever heard. I'm sure he's thought it. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
If everything you said got people upset.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's thought it, but I've never heard him say that. No.
Okay. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with him about any of the things in the CES letter? So whether it's polygamy or Book of Mormon historicity or the Book of Abraham historicity or blacks, like, have you ever tried to talk to him about your doubts or the problems in our history?
Yes. Every time I have tried to talk to him or another family member, I get shut down pretty quickly. I will ask something like when I did with the ordained women, just a simple question. It's either ignored or it's brushed off as, well, we don't know everything. We have to have faith. That's what I've been told about polygamy, about blacks in the priesthood, and it leaves me doubting my own faith. So it gets shut down really quickly, unfortunately.
So there's just no willingness to talk about things like that.
No, I've always sort of thought, well, maybe he's just sick of answering it, but it's not really fair because not everybody is sick of talking about it and they're still trying to understand. So
a lot of people want to know if the apostles really know the problems and have really thought about them deeply. And it sounds like you wouldn't have any way to know because they won't talk to you about it.
Well, they say they do, but it doesn't feel like that. So I question whether they do or not, but they say they're in touch. I would go out on a limb and disagree with that a little bit.
Out of touch in what way?
Knowing, maybe they might know about some of the pain, but I don't believe they feel. I think they struggle with mourning with those that mourn, and that is a baptismal covenant. So I think, they struggle with that, and that's unfortunate.
Isn't that weird? Because they're supposed to be special witnesses of Christ. This is supposed to be a Christ-centered church. If you're going to associate anything with Christ, it's going to be love and empathy. And yet you're saying the men who are supposed to be special witnesses of Christ have a fundamental empathy problem.
I do, because I feel like they look at it, they see the business of it. The church is an organization, and there are so many organized things that need to happen. And so I think they might get caught up in the fact that they're teaching people to teach other people, instead of, because the church is so large that they can only do what they can do. But I don't see a lot of love and empathy. I want to believe it's there. I just don't always see it.
So to you, they seem to function more as sort of administrators, executives than they do pastors and sort of compassionate service sort of people.
Yes. And I'm not sure they would disagree with me. I think they would perhaps consider themselves to be mostly administrators, more than pastors.
Okay. Has there ever been any talk about the second anointing? I'm guessing that would just be off topic. Do you even know what that is?
I have read a little bit about it, but my knowledge is not that great, no.
So it's never, with your parents, with your siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, the second anointing has never come up?
No.
Okay. What about special powers to heal? People are asking, does your grandpa heal the sick? And, you know, as an apostle of Christ, does he have special powers of faith or priesthood that make, you know, if you have a sick cousin or nephew, you know, do they take him to grandpa for that special blessing to heal him a birth defect or a significant illness? Has that ever come up?
I've asked him to give me blessings before, and one time my son, I have an autistic son, and he was really, really sick, and I asked him to give him a blessing, and I think there is that faith there, like, oh, well, maybe his blessing will be better than the next man's blessing. I don't believe it is anymore. Perhaps I should, but with my experiences with blessings, I've never experienced anything miraculous or anything that led me to believe that blessings were something worth having. Boy, that's harsh. That sounds really bad to say, but
And you even mean blessings from apostles?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is my feeling. I've never received a blessing that made me think, well, that was definitely God speaking to me. So.
Or heard of one where your grandpa healed somebody who was deathly ill or cancer or blind or lame or leprosy or anything like that?
Nope, I've never heard of that happening. No.
Okay. A lot of people want to know what worry the brethren. Like, do you ever have a sense for like what their concerns are? You know, some people, what about Kate Kelly or ordained women? What about progressives, liberals? What about people leaving the church? The growth of the church, money, tithing, people resigning. Do you have any sense for what's on the brethren's mind about what keeps them up at night, if anything?
Mm-hmm. Well, occasionally my grandfather will gather us together and have these little talks. And I remember one time he gave us a big, long spiel about pornography and the evils of pornography. And so I think that is a big problem, and they worry about just the internet, media, that kind of thing, getting into people's minds and hearts and the problems that it can cause. But I hope they're worried about the people leaving the church. I really and truly hope they are, because they should be, because those are the people that they need more than ever. And that would be the only reason I would want to stay, is to be a change for good. But I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can stay and be happy and be a good, happy person. So
just as you were talking, a question came to mind. You've mentioned how amazing your grandmother is, Barbara, and how you don't have a negative thing to say. Have you noticed anything about their relationship or, her role relative to his that's worth mentioning, either good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
Because she's so amazing, and yet even me, I'm asking you all about him. There's gender inequality in the church, obviously. And you're telling me she's fabulous and he's, good, but
mm-hmm. I tell you what, she would be a great apostle. I mean, if we could reverse the roles, I think she would be amazing. But she wouldn't want that, which is partially the reason I think she'd be amazing. She is such a wonderful woman, and I've watched her sort of sweetly take a step back, and it's kind of hard for me because I see people surround my grandfather after different events, and everybody wants to shake his hand, and she's back there in the background. And if I had to pick the better person, it would be her. She's just a wonderful, wonderful woman, and she's so full of faith and love, and I've never heard her say a unkind word or anything controversial. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if she did, but just because I'd be like, wow, Grandma, I didn't know you thought that way. But she is such a good person. I wonder sometimes how she became the type of person who could step back and say, yeah, everybody's here to see him. Nobody cares about me. And I'm not saying nobody cares about her, but that's how it seems, because he is the one that everybody wants to talk to. Everybody wants to touch or see. And she gets left behind.
And that makes you feel what?
It makes me sad because I think she's such a wonderful person. And I actually approached my grandfather about writing a book about my grandma. And I got shut down again. And I was like, man, I can't come up with any good ideas, can I? Because she's such a wonderful, sweet person. And she is not doing too well right now. And I wonder when she's gone, like, I don't know how life will be for him, because she's been such a wonderful companion to him.
Several of the apostles have remarried, not just for time, but for eternity. They've specifically chosen women who weren't sealed to other men, and then they were sealed. And according to D&C 132, in the heavens, they'll be in polygamous relationships. If your grandmother, do you think your dad believes in polygamy in heaven? And if he does, if Barbara passed away, could you see him remarrying? I'm told that they've been told they have to get remarried within a certain amount of time, or they're strongly urged to get remarried very quickly. How would you feel about your dad remarrying a woman and getting sealed to her? Do you believe that polygamy will last in heaven? Do you think that he would believe in polygamy? How would Barbara feel about that? Do you have any idea?
Well, I think it's gross, but I'd be like, oh, gross. Grandpa getting remarried? No, thank you. I believe that the brethren do believe in polygamy and do believe it's a doctrine that I don't know what extent they believe in it. I hope he doesn't get remarried. He's old. Like, I mean, apostles are kind of a hot commodity in this weird Mormon world, but it's just gross, man. Like, who would want to hitch themselves to that wagon? But whatever. He's a great guy. I guess maybe they want those supposed perks. As for what my grandma would think, she's just so sweet. She's never controversial. I think she would tell him to do what makes him happy. So, but I don't like it, but I have no choice in the matter. So,
okay. So in terms of fears and concerns, they're concerned about the internet. They're concerned about pornography. They're concerned about anti-Mormon stuff. Mm-hmm. Those are the main things you hear him being concerned about.
Yep.
Do you have a sense? A couple of people asked this, how he might feel about people who don't believe everything. You know, we call it the middle way, or progressive Mormons, or liberal Mormons. People who don't believe in polygamy, who think that Joseph probably got it wrong, that the blacks, that was a mistake, that the LGBT stuff is wrong, but they still want to hang in the church, disbelieving a bunch of stuff, but believing in love and compassion and charity and the community and maybe some of the teachings of Christ. And you may not know this, but do you have a sense for how he would feel about people like that, whether he would want them to stay or not, or what he would say to them?
I think he would definitely want them to stay. But I think he would probably disagree with them because I believe he sees things as more black and white than a lot of other people do. I cannot foresee a time when he would ever want somebody to leave the church. He probably gets frustrated with people, and maybe he's like, fine, leave if you're going to be that antagonistic towards it. But I don't see him wanting them to leave. I don't see that. Perhaps I just don't want to see it, but I think he would want people to stay, and maybe he'd want them to be more mainstream, but I think he would want them to stay.
Okay. Has he ever discussed these recent essays with you or the family, the new essays the church has put out? Has that come up at all?
He may have talked about it with my aunts and uncles, but it hasn't trickled down to us grandkids.
Okay. All right. So, actually, that's all the questions I had about him, really. And then I was wanting to talk about your story. A lot of people wanted to know what made you fall away, what the crack was, how long it took. So I'd like to now just talk briefly, and you've already talked about this some, but I know a lot of people whose names would be very familiar to all Mormons, who don't believe or who doubt. Many, many people, wealthy people or influential people or celebrities, artists. Like, there's a lot of people who quietly no longer believe or have serious problems with the church, but they just, they won't talk about it. They can't talk about it. They're scared to talk about it. They love it too much to talk about it. Like, there's a whole variety there. But you are different. I've been really impressed with how balanced you've been, with how fair you've been, with how loving and empathetic you've been. You're willing to say good things, but you're also willing to say difficult things. But most importantly, you have violated the family code and the Mormon code. You're being vulnerable, and you're speaking openly about things that your entire family and church culture would tell you it's wrong to even talk about this. And I'm just wondering why? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing what your family would be saddened by, what your grandparents would be saddened by, what your church culture would be disappointed in? Why are you talking out? You've talked a bit about it, but I want to understand it better, because there's so much social pressure on you, more than anyone, more than most, I should say. And yet you're doing it, and you're one of very few people. Obviously we had the son of one of the General Relief Society presidency members on last week on Mormon Stories. I found that to be a very heroic episode. His name is Eric Reeves. He's the son of Linda Reeves, who's the second counselor in the General Relief Society presidency. But now you're coming out. Did Eric's story influence you all to come out to me? And just talk a bit more about why you're willing to do this when so much social and family pressure would be against this. And I would have assumed that there would be so much risk to either your personal safety, your personal health and well-being, how your family treats you, getting rejected. Maybe it could influence your husband's job. I'm just wondering why you'd be willing to take such risks as I would perceive it.
All right. Well, thank you again for saying such nice things about me. I'm not sure I deserve them, but I appreciate it. And as to Eric Reeves' story, I actually just listened to it last night. I had already contacted you a while ago, but it was a good for me to listen to. It was interesting to me. One of the reasons why I decided I was going to stop being silent necessarily is, if you've read my blog, and I don't know if you've read any of my articles.
No,
but
I
wrote
didn't even
about-
know you blogged. What's your blog? What's it called?
Well, it's just mormonexperiments.blogspot.com. You know,
Okay.
just one of you. Everybody's a writer nowadays, right? But I just started writing after I had this experience with committing adultery, and so I decided to blog through that all and through the journey through that. And I wrote a little bit about, it's funny, you mentioned it, the Mormon Code. And I talked about the Mormon Code of Silence. And I mentioned in there a story from church not too long ago where I was in gospel principles class with a member who had just joined the church not all that long ago. And the lesson was on repentance. And she asked a question. She started to ask a question. She was like, well, I have a question. You know, is it true that everything that I've done is washed away at baptism? And she started to say, because I've done, and then a woman interrupted her and said, we don't need to know everything that you've done. And she was very shaming and rude. And I was like, oh, because that to me was a shaming act to push that woman away. And I began to wonder then, why are we so quiet? Why can't we say things that we've done wrong? Why can we not admit to it? Aren't the most beautiful stories in the scriptures the stories of redemption where people came back from below the bottom? Christ was beneath us all. And so I started to wonder, why do I have to be quiet? On the mission, we were always told no PTs, meaning no past transgressions. Don't talk about those with people. And that bothered me because how could we connect with these people at all if we weren't allowed to talk? And so I decided to reach out to you. And quite honestly, I was surprised that you were like, oh, okay, yeah. Because out of the hope that maybe my story could help someone, and I hope that doesn't sound arrogant because I have no idea if my story could help anyone, but my only wish is that people can find happiness and be okay with being themselves, who they are. I've written a little bit about the similarities of Mormon culture and rape, and the silence of it all, and how silence can be so damaging and deadly to people. And I feel that way. I feel like the more I speak openly, the more I understand about how I feel, and hopefully somebody can connect with that. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to reach out to people. I would love to be able to connect with more people and help anybody I could, just get them through this, and maybe they can help me too. I don't know. I was afraid, John, to, like, I was laying in bed last night and I'm like, is this the right thing? You know, and I was getting stuck in this Mormon thinking, and we had a big storm last night and I'm like, is this a sign? Like, and then my computer wasn't working, which was totally user error because I am the worst. But I was like, is this a sign? You know, it's that typical Mormon thinking. But I got very afraid of speaking out. But in the long run, I just think it's good for everyone to be able to speak their truth and be authentic. And hopefully their authentic self is someone who is loving and accepting of all people. And that was a long, rambling way to get about, you know, the fact that it's selfish. It's part of my own healing to be able to open up and talk about my feelings. So I thank you for letting me do that.
So for you, being vulnerable, talking about weaknesses, being open about who you are, it almost sounds like for you that's healing that little girl, that little Mormon girl who never had the chance to discover who she was and is, and to talk about what she thinks and feels. It sounds like for you, the growth is figuring that out now and claiming your power to be open, to say what you think and feel, and to discover who you are untethered from all the social pressures. Is that?
Absolutely. And I think everybody should do that. And I just imagine the healing that could happen within the church if people were to be able to get rid of their shame, be more of their authentic self. I love that term. And to just open up and be honest, whether it's at church or whether it's not in the church. I don't think it matters. I think people need to find out who they are away from who they are as a Mormon. And that's the journey that I've been on. And so I hope maybe somebody can relate, and hopefully I haven't seemed arrogant or know-it-all. I certainly don't feel that way. But, that is my one true hope, that maybe somebody will find a little bit of light in my journey.
And so the main principles you're standing for are openness, honesty, integrity, getting in touch with who you are, becoming your authentic self. When you talk about the values that you want to stand for as motivation for doing this interview and helping others, are those the main values you stand for? Are there others that you want to stand for? I guess compassion and acceptance is another big piece of that I'm hearing.
Absolutely. I just want people to be kind with one another, and I don't know where my story will take me. I don't imagine that it will take me back into the church, but it's possible. And I hope that doesn't bother people. I know it probably will. But that is what I would like. If I could have any change in the church, it would be more open, honest, loving people in charge, or maybe the people in charge could learn how to be that way. That is what I stand for, and that might not be good enough for a lot of people, but that's good enough for me for now.
Beautiful. A lot of people are saying, what advice would you have to people now who, let's just say, are either sad in their experiences with the church like you have been, just not happy, or let's say they're doubting, they're studying the Book of Mormon's historicity or the Book of Abraham or polygamy, and they're just like, this is all made up, this is all made up. And those are usually two of the main things. Or they're struggling with inequality, with women's issues in the church, or they're struggling with how LGBT people are treated. I think between those things, that represents a huge chunk of why people leave, or they're just feeling bored or uninspired. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to people who are struggling with all those issues?
I think it's kind of healthy for people to take a step back sometimes. At least it's been for me. There have been so many times in my life where I've just taken a step back from the church, and I haven't left the church, but I took a step back. And I did something that made me feel more me, like I pierced my nose, or I've got a few tattoos, and
show us your tattoo on your arm. What does it mean?
Okay,
what does it mean?
I've got this one. Where are we here?
So it's a semicolon, right?
Yep. So for mental illness, and then it says "be kind."
Okay. So what does the semicolon mean? I know, but tell others.
It's just it's a mental illness awareness, suicide prevention. Mental illness is something that's very near and dear to my heart, because I've suffered with it and watched other people suffer with it. And so, I didn't feel guilty getting a tattoo of something like a semicolon or something that says "be kind." I also have a giant one of the autism spectrum heart because of the work I do with autistic kids and with my son in particular. So it just made me feel more me. So I took a step back. I did a few things that made me feel more myself. And then I just got the courage to do more things that felt more like myself. So my suggestion is, one, take a step back and find support. I do love Mormon Spectrum. That's how I got up with my Dallas area group here. And they've been very sweet and kind to me. And then listening to Mormon Stories or other podcasts where people talk about the church, even if they're poking fun at certain things, I enjoy that occasionally too. So I think it's nice to find your sense of community, because that is the scariest thing. That's terrifying for me, to know that I can totally lose everybody out of my life. What
other podcasts have you listened to besides Mormon Stories?
Let's see. Mormon Stories and Mormon Stories. I don't think I've listened to any other podcast.
So you haven't heard
No.
like Infants on Thrones or...
No, I've seen it.
Okay.
My problem is that I get so, like, I'm so behind. And by the time my husband says I'm addicted because I spend all my free time, like, listening to Mormon Stories. Or Radio from Hell, which is a Salt Lake radio show. I love that one too. So I really have a very limited...
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. So through Mormon Spectrum, you found a local support community that could help you make friends and help you feel like you're not alone and to help you feel like you have a bit of a community, right?
Yes. And they've been wonderful, which surprised me because I was so set on the idea that people who leave the church are crazy and mean and scary and bad. So it's just so funny. I mean, I'm a grown up. Why would I think that? But you know, it was surprising to me. They reached out to me and they were so kind. It was nice.
Okay. So that's great. I just interviewed Allison Udall for Mormon Spectrum yesterday. We're going to be plugging Mormon Spectrum on Mormon Stories and on Mormon Transitions podcast. So I just wanted to reflect that. Shout out to Steve and Allison and the good people at Mormon Spectrum. Okay, podcasts. What other advice besides local communities, Mormon Spectrum, and podcasts? Oh, real quick, your grandpa spoke out against podcasts in a recent talk he gave. What if he were to say to you, "You appeared on Mormon Stories. Those podcasts are dangerous. You know, that's Satan." What would you say to him to say, "Grandpa, you've got..." And I don't care about me or Mormon Stories, but just you've got podcasts wrong. What would you say to him about that?
Well, I would ask if he had listened to them because I don't know how you could listen to something like Mormon Stories. And I started listening to Mormon Stories thinking it was going to be something completely different than what it was. I was expecting a lot of just bitter feelings towards the church, and I didn't get that. I got these beautiful stories. And your interviewing style is not leading or sort of trying to get somebody to say something. So I would ask him if he listened to it, and I may fall back on we'll have to agree to disagree, but I hope that he will see that I'm afraid that he will see this as a act of disloyalty towards him. And that does make me sad, but I hope he doesn't. I hope he sees it for what it truly is.
What is it to you? This, you coming out and talking. You say, "Grandpa, this is why I did the interview." It's because what?
Because I've been quiet for so long and there are people suffering, and maybe part of me wants to make it a little bit personal for him, to make him see that he is not out of it. Our family is not all in the clear. We've got people suffering in our family, and there are people suffering in the church, and just maybe make it a little bit more personal for all of us.
So help him develop empathy, basically.
Yeah, that would be the hope.
By making it
I haven't done that in the past, but I've tried, so we'll see.
Okay. So any other advice to people struggling besides podcasts and community? There are a lot of people scared to come out to family and friends, scared to speak openly. Any other advice to them,
I think if you want to truly be happy, you need to find your voice. And it is scary, but most things that are scary are usually worth it in the end. And I'm not at the end, so hey, listen to me or don't listen to me. Go check back with me in a few months. Maybe I'll be like, that was a terrible decision, but I don't think so. I really don't think so, because I feel peace in knowing that what I'm saying is true, and not trying to hide anything or be anybody other than I naturally am. And that's a nice feeling, to find a community that you can just be yourself in.
So you're saying find your voice. Stop being, I hear you saying speak up and find your voice, but man, you have modeled such poise and fairness and charity. Like you've got that "be kind" on your wrist. I think you've really internalized that, because I have not sensed mean-spiritedness or anger. And so is that part of the advice you'd give in terms of when people do speak up, how to speak up?
I think it's helpful. Nobody wants to listen to somebody who is very argumentative and just seems to already have their end goal in mind. I think it's nice when it's refreshing when people say, I don't know all the answers. I'm trying to understand. Help me understand. And I've said that to my grandfather and other church members, and I'll say that to people who aren't church members. Help me understand. I want to understand. I think most people want to understand. But more than that, I think they want to be loved and be heard, and that's honestly what I hope for everybody.
So find your voice, but be kind in how you speak with others.
Right. It's not too hard. You can do it.
A lot of people, okay, so you've already kind of addressed this, but like, do you have worries about retaliation, about your grandma and grandpa withdrawing their love from you, about your parents disowning you, or your siblings ostracizing you, or your husband losing his job? Like, do you have any fears about what might come of this interview?
I am worried about my in-laws disliking me more than they already do, which is hard because I thought we were getting a better relationship. I was really, truly hoping for that. And it's hard for them to hear that their son is not perfect. And I've been honest about his imperfections as well as my own. And so that's hard for them. And as for my husband losing his job, I don't worry about that. He doesn't work for an LDS company, and I doesn't work with any LDS people. So we're nicely in a safe little bubble. I am worried about my family's feelings. I care about people's feelings. I know that maybe they might not think I do to take a step like this. But that's not true. I love my family. I love them. But I want them to be happy too, and maybe some of them are unhappy. So I am a little worried. I am more afraid of my dad than anyone else because he is very strict down the line Mormon, and he may or may not decide to never speak to me again. And I don't know. With my grandpa, I don't know. He may just ignore me. Which is almost worse, if you know what I mean. I hate being ignored.
It's way worse. I think being ignored is way worse than fighting.
Because it's somebody just completely discounting your voice and your opinions. And so I dislike that. But I'm not sure what will happen. It is a worry. It kept me up at night. But I think it's worth it.
How can it be worth it to jeopardize your relationship with your in-laws, your dad, and maybe even your grandparents?
Because I'm 32 years old and I feel like I haven't lived a day in my life that hasn't been controlled to some extent by my religion. And it's nice to be able to say, hey, I'm taking control of this and I'm going to live my life the way I see fit, and to the dictates of my own conscience, I will act. And I think that's appropriate, and I think it is worth it. And hopefully, if they are guided by love at all, my family will see the truth in this.
A lot of people want to know if you would consider joining another church, whether you still, maintain beliefs in God and Christ and things like that. What are your, if you end up resigning and they let you resign and you stick with that, do you see yourself joining another church?
I've been to a lot of different churches because when people would invite me to a church, I felt like a hypocrite to say no, since I was always inviting people to my church. So I've been to several and I see good in all of them, but I am lazy. I don't want to go to another church just because I would rather not go to church on Sunday. And having been a member of the church my whole life, I'm a little bit burned out. And so while I believe in God, I don't see myself being an active member of another church because that's just work I don't really necessarily want to do. That's never to say, I could eventually, but it might be nice to just lay in bed on Sundays and do nothing.
Yeah. It is beautiful, and Sundays are amazing. Okay, two last questions. The final question is there anything the church could do to get you back? Like, let's say Grandpa came to you and said, "All right, I want you in this church. You give me your list, and I'll make everything you say happen. I'm now one of the senior most members of the Quorum of the 12. President Packer's gone. I'm good buddies with Elder Nelson. Like, I'll make it happen." Is there a list you could give him that could then lead to your coming back to the church?
Jeez, if he said that to me, I'd be like, make me the prophet. Like, seriously, put me in charge. I would run this church real good. And this is why I get in trouble, because I joke about stuff like that, and I shouldn't. I don't know. I feel like once you've been alienated, it is hard to come back. But I also feel like there's forgiveness, and it's possible. Now, I'm not done in my research of all things church doctrine, and so it's a possibility that I might read something that just completely turns me off, and I'll say, oh, no, like, never again will I go back to that. I haven't gotten to that point yet. But I wouldn't, if my grandpa came to me and said, I'll fix everything that you want me to fix, I would not take him up on that. I would ask him to go speak to other people, because there is no way I could ever speak for the church, nor would I want to. As much as I would love to be a change for good and love and acceptance, I wouldn't feel comfortable even coming up with a list.
Really? Even to make you want to come back? Okay, so since you left because it didn't make you happy or bring you joy overall, what would have to change for you to feel joy in the church? Do you have a sense for that?
I'm not sure I ever could feel joy in the church. The only thing that would have to change would be my perspective and maybe my understanding. And because you have to create happiness. You have to find it wherever you are, grow where you're planted, that kind of thing. And I can't foresee that happening for me. When I've been so happy away from it, I can't see myself forcing myself to be happy back inside of the church again. As always, I leave wiggle room in there. It could happen, but I don't foresee that happening.
Okay. So, last question. Let's just say that your parents and your siblings and your grandparents, they say, I'm not listening to all that, but they're willing to listen to the last few minutes, the last comments you make. And you were to summarize what you stand for and your testimony as it stands today. And you don't even have to worry about them. I mean, normally the way we end Mormon Stories is by people just sharing their testimony of what they care about and believe in now. And of course, that's come through this whole interview. But if you were to summarize it now, what would be your final testimony that you share with us, your listeners, and with your family if they happen to tune in?
I would say that there is so much love out there that I feel it should be shared with everyone, regardless of anything we disagree with. We should love first, always love first, and be kind, treat each other nicely, maybe not fight so much, but work for a change in a loving way. Be smart about it, but work for a change in a way that makes other people feel lifted up and not torn down. And that is what I believe. I still believe in a God that loves us, and I hope that I do right by him always, but I hope I do right by myself and by my children and my husband and my family. But I hope that anybody listening will just maybe take a look at their lives and see what they can do better to be kinder to one another, in or out of the church, doesn't matter. That's just always been my message, and I hope maybe someday that'll get to my grandfather and to other members of church leadership, that there are people out there and their feelings and opinions are valid and they matter.
And if there are any listeners out there who are struggling with depression or anxiety or mental illness, eating disorders, let's say they have a child who's autistic, what would you say to those who are struggling with mental illness or other challenges in their lives?
Wow, I've done all of those. So I could honestly say, hey, I've been there. There's no shame in it. There is no shame. We all struggle. Reach out to someone. Don't keep it in. Keeping it in is poison. If you need to reach out to me, you can reach out to me. That is fine. Like, the one thing in life I want to do is help people. And I would love to be able to walk somebody through it or just listen to their story. And so don't hold it in. Get help. Take medicine if you need to. There is no shame in that. It can be a life changer. And so just get rid of the stigma and reach out. And I think you'll find a lot of people reaching back for you.
Beautiful. Well, Laura Andreasen, you are a class act. This exceeded every possible hope that I could have had. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know my listeners are going to love this episode. It's going to be a top 5, and we've got over 560 hours, and I know this is going to be a top 5. So bless you. You're a good soul. Please let us know if we can help you in any way. And thank you so much for your vulnerability, your charity, your honesty, and your willingness to just share your story. We love you, and we love your family, and we love Elder Ballard and Barbara, and please send them our love, and just let's spread the love.
Agree. Spread the love. No, thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
All right. Listeners, thank you for listening. Please join us up at mormonstories.org if you want to comment, leave your compliments. We don't need any criticisms of Laura. So if you want to heap any praise on her, please do it at mormonstories.org. If we'll post her email address or her blog name so that you can get a hold of her to thank her. So please do that. And then I just have to also thank those who financially support Mormon Stories. You guys keep this alive. We couldn't do it without you. So anyone who has given or will give to Mormon Stories, just know that that's what makes this possible. So thanks so much to everyone, but mostly thanks to you, Laura, for your amazing gift of your story.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us make more like it by becoming a monthly subscriber at mormonstories.org. Music for this episode was provided by The Lower Lights.
When other sources cease to make me whole, when with a wounded heart, anger or malice, I draw myself